Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm back from my second trade show in 2 weeks, and all is looking like I didn't catch COVID. I was as careful as I could be, and that's paid off so far. Hopefully it stays that way. While I get that people are sick of this virus, and I am too, there is nothing wrong or stupid or unpatriotic about wearing a mask to protect yourself. But people in other states sure looked at me funny a lot for wearing a mask indoors. In my home state of Washington, people are pretty good about that. But in the places I visited, Utah and Colorado, it seems like no one cares. I mean, people are almost laughing at me for wearing a mask. Even at the shows, a lot of my peers weren't wearing masks even though that was the rule. But rules are meant to be broken. And these days, sometimes when people break rules, they get sick. Hopefully, for the people that have had COVID and the people that are going to get it, there aren't any long-term effects. But just like the effects of the vaccine, who knows? But back to the shows. I first need to thank Lisa at OR for the hotel rooms. I was stoked to be staying closer to the show, and the show itself, well, there were 2 big brands there, and the place was pretty dead. It was sad to see, but totally expected. The show is too late date-wise for the brands, and we are past the point of build it and they will come. At this point, it's more like build it right or someone else will build it better, and that's what's happened. Until the dates and location change, this show will continue to die, and regardless of what people are saying, this has nothing to do with the virus. If that was the case, the other shows wouldn't be experiencing the success that they have been. But as I've mentioned before, I love the people at OR, and I want to help them. But they have to take a deep look in the mirror and help themselves first, and see the writing is on the wall if they don't make changes quickly. So that's the negative. The positive news in my life is I received my 3rd generation Oura ring the other day. Now I can monitor my heart rate and get all the amazing sleep data that Oura is known for. Thanks to Dave Goto for sending me this ring, as it's the only wearable that I'll ever use. I mean, I'm not a jewelry guy or a watch guy, so I replaced my wedding ring with my Oura, and now I'm wearing tech, but no one can tell. Another thing I'm going to be wearing soon is glasses. I went to the eye doctor a few weeks ago, and he diagnosed me with OLD syndrome, treatable with glasses. And for this, I want to thank Curtis Ellis for sending me a bunch of RX frames, and for being one of my first supporters as well. If you know Curtis, you know how awesome he is. So thanks, man. Now it's time to talk about my awesome guest. And now that the Olympics have started, the world is about to hear one of the great stories of sport. Benjamin Alexander spent most of his adult life in places like Burning Man and Ibiza behind turntables. But in a random series of events, Benji quit the DJ life and put his focus into skiing with the goal of making the Olympics. As crazy as that sounds, Benji made that happen in only 6 years. And he's the only ski racer representing Jamaica in Beijing. The story is like Cool Runnings on snow, with the added bonus of DJing, sex parties, and more. We talk about it all. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on, and to follow me on Twitter at PowellMovement1 or Instagram at The Powell Movement. Please retweet and share my stuff, as it really does help the show grow. Finally, I want to ask you to support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, it's time to chat with Benjamin Alexander. You're getting ready to head to the Olympics. When do you travel to Beijing?
Yeah, I'm jumping on a plane to Zurich for a quick layover on my way to Beijing in about 24 hours. Super excited.
I can't believe it. It's that close and you're right about to get there. So yeah, I can imagine you're really excited. It's being held in communist China. There are talks of a lot of terrible things that go on over there. Do you think about any of that at all? Or are you just stoked to be going to the Olympics?
Yeah, I mean, these things come up on the news quite a lot. The last 2 years of my life have been the most singly focused years of my entire life. And the goal of just qualifying has been huge. And I haven't really had a moment to scratch myself, let alone think about any geopolitical issues that are going on associated with the games.
I can imagine that. And to prep for the games, what do you need to do? Like, how many COVID tests do you think you will take between today and 2 weeks from now?
I'm going to make a guess of about 16, 18.
Okay. And prepping for the games, like when you're packing your bags and you're getting ready to go, like how many bags are you going to travel to the games with?
Not that bad, actually. After having been on the road as a DJ, I'm really good at just carrying the things I need. So it's only going to be a ski bag and then I'm going to check 2 bags and then have a bag with me on the plane. So 4 bags total. But I mean, skiing is an equipment heavy sport, and I'm carrying a lot of sponsor wear for my coach.
Okay. And do your sponsors create like a full-on wardrobe for on and off snow for you? And you're all set up with all kinds of cool stuff in Jamaican colors?
Yeah, so I'm sat in the Jamaican Puma tracksuit right now, but they don't have any of the clothes for on snow. Puma don't do that. So I'll be wearing my other sponsored stuff. But as it pertains to being in the Olympic Village and in the opening ceremony, yeah, I'm all kitted out. It's super colorful and I'm really excited.
Nice. And who are your sponsors other than the Pumas and whoever's supplying Jamaica with their gear? Who else actually just sponsors you personally?
Yeah, so STIO, out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. They're expanding rapidly. Were my first sponsor, and they've been absolutely amazing. And then I'm proud to say that I'm sponsored by the big guys, Atomic and Lecky, just like Schifrin, and it's been a wild ride. And Lentz, the heated sock company, couldn't live without them.
Nice. And do you have like a brand that you put front and center on your helmet? Like, do you have that real estate to sell?
Yes, that is being negotiated right now.
That's like a big payday for you. And it's like this one year is the big year. You're going to be in the Olympics. It's going to be a huge story. Like that real estate for you, while you're not expected to be on a podium, that real estate has to be just as pricey as someone who's expected to be on the podium because of all the coverage you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over the weekend, my name was in The Economist, and there was a write-up on me in Rolling Stone. So we're definitely getting a lot of coverage. And I think that's just testament to what the Olympics is about, right? It's about the best in the world, but it's also about participation and the really interesting human interest element to the athletes. And so I think we're going to be pretty much top billing with a few of the other guys this year.
And before you can even think about the Olympics, so much has to happen in your life. And you're born in Northamptonshire and you grew up in Wellingborough and you don't come from a ski family or ski money or ski anything. Your dad moves from Jamaica to England when he's like 5 years old and your family's pretty much a working class family.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say that to ski, you need 3 things. You need to have a lot of money, and that means that even if your parents don't ski at some point, you're going to interact with other people that are moneyed and are skiers. You need to have someone in your family or your parents that ski, or you need to have the geographic blessing of looking up at a mountain and you'll find a way to get on that mountain at some point. And I had none of those. Born into a working class family, my parents spent most of their lives as drivers or in factories. And even though I've now traveled to more than a third of the world's countries, I didn't step foot on an airplane until I was 19 years old. So yeah, I had a massive late coming to the sport and to a lot of things in life.
Cool. And, you know, if you're in the US and you don't grow up with white skin, you aren't born with white privilege. And while I don't know anything but being a white guy in the US, I've seen friends punished almost for their skin color, which is totally wrong. But what's the racism level like over in England?
It's different. It's there, but it's not as upfront and center as it is in America. It's kind of more of an undertone of racism. And I'm not sure if that's better. It's probably worse because you can deal with the things that are being outspoken, and the things that are kind of under the table tend to be a lot harder to deal with. I haven't lived in England in the last 16 years. So things are changing rapidly as they're changing everywhere in the world. And we're really noticing this in a lot of our media, where there are so many more diverse faces on TV shows, on the adverts for products and in our magazines. So yeah, it's changing. Everything is changing for the better, I feel.
But it's a lot different than it is here in the US because you've been here a lot, and I'm sure you've seen all just the terrible things that seem to go on here on a weekly basis, and you don't really see those as much in England, although things are said behind the scenes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more of a behind the scenes thing here in England. But look, I do have a little bit of an advantage. There's something about the English accent that the Americans find, I don't know, so appealing. I can talk about my flatulence and people think I sound really, really educated. So I have a I have a little bit of an advantage as it comes to dealing with racism in the United States. And that plus the fact that I'm 6'6". Most people like to punch down on people that are smaller than them. So I don't really get much of it to my face anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were that big.
Yeah.
It also seems like, you know, you talk about education, and it seems like your schooling, in the beginning, you were like the troublemaker in school. What does that mean? Like, what kind of shit were you getting into?
Oh, fighting, ripping kids' shirts, causing absolute hell for kind of substitute teachers, just being the worst kid ever. I was really bad. I mean, my grandmother said that I'd probably be in prison or in jail before I was in prison or dead before I was 18 years old. I was such a troublemaker when I was a young kid.
But at the same time, someone saw some potential in you, and you end up getting a scholarship that keeps you away from the bad kids. It puts you in a private school. And you kind of look at that as like that scholarship and putting you with kids that aren't causing as much trouble kind of paved the way where you're going today.
Total sliding doors moment, absolute sliding doors. They say the devil makes use of idle hands. And, I was just kind of grasping concepts in school much quicker than the other kids and just getting bored. And that's where my troublemaking came from. And so they finally figured out a way to calm me down, which was just to keep throwing work at me, like much higher level stuff, years ahead of where I should have been. And ended up getting a scholarship, as you said, to a school that was founded in 1595.
Whoa.
And that was really the turning point. I was now in a place where I could be academically challenged and also where there weren't any other kids around me that were kind of helping me with my bad behavior, shall we say. And that really was a turning point in my life. I changed that school at the age of 11.
And is the private education in England way better than the public education?
Massively, yeah. I think the biggest thing is not only are the teachers to a higher level and actually care more about their jobs because they're probably paid a lot more, but the class sizes were lower than, less than 20, whereas there were probably double that if I was going to go to the state school, which was literally just across the road from the school that I went to.
Okay. And by the time you get to high school, I think it's around the late 90s. And what's considered cool to the English teenager at that point? Was it like Rage Against the Machine and Limp Bizkit or Tribe Called Quest? What were your musical tastes?
So I dropped out of, not dropped out, but I elected not to continue with the private school at the age of 16, predominantly because they were disciplining me so much, which, it was really just kind of affecting my freedoms. Also, I was going into the sixth form. So in England, we can drive cars from the age of 17, which is the sixth form. And I went back to the school recently as part of a documentary we were filming, and I noticed that my parents had never owned a car anywhere near as good as one of the cars that were in the student lot. And that was a big part of the reason why I wanted to leave this private school, because I knew I wouldn't be able to keep up with them financially at that point. And I went back into kind of like the state schooling system. But by this point, I'd gotten far enough ahead with my education that it was okay. I could go back into state school and still continue with that momentum, shall we say. And it was here where I started to interact again with a lot of diverse individuals, and a lot of them also from Jamaica. And they would bring back these cassette tapes from London, from these pirate radio stations that were broadcasting this underground electronic dance music, not EDM, but garage, it was called. And this was heavily influenced by hip hop, drum and bass, and Jamaican genres such as bashment and dancehall. And I thought this was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard. And it was these cassettes that inspired me to go out and buy turntables and records and become a DJ myself. So it was really all about that during that period.
In terms of learning, I mean, how long does it take you to get good on the turntables? Because eventually you're doing pirate radio. And I don't know if it's one of those things where you can get in big trouble. It sounds like it's illegal, but I mean, I don't really know what the deal is over in England.
Yeah, so I bought my decks in February of the year 2000. By October of that year, myself and a couple of friends put together this mixtape that went quote unquote viral in our local town. And this thing spread like wildfire. I just learned the other day that my friends were selling copies of this cassette for £1 per tape. I got pretty good. I mean, just like with a lot of things, if I'm interested in it, I become incredibly obsessive and will put ungodly number of hours into that thing every single day just to keep going forward. And last year or 2 years ago now, during the pandemic, I started to go down that rabbit hole on backgammon and ended up playing, reading, and studying the game at least 30 hours a week. And that's just kind of my personality type. If I get into something, I go down the rabbit hole hard and fast.
Oh, that's incredible. And do you start getting hired to play clubs and play parties during your first round of being a DJ?
Not so much. It was a little bit of a different scene to how the house music works. So I was playing on pirate radio within a year of getting my turntables. I had some club bookings, but there was always something that kind of irked me about the scene, in that it was there were really hostile environments inside of the nightclubs that were playing that music. I would always see a fight in a club. I would often see people with knives, and sometimes there would even be gunfire. And at some point, while I was going to basically the MIT of England for physics by day and dodging bullets by night, I just thought the risk reward of this scene is not kind of panning out for me anymore. So it was a couple of years after maybe in the beginning of 2003, that I kind of sold all of my records and turntables and said, this is not for me. I don't feel like risking my life on a every weekend basis.
So you give up DJing, you're in school at one point for physics, but I think you might drop out or go to a different school and it kind of transitions into finance, or I don't know if you actually study finance, but you make the decision when you finish school that, hey, I'm going to move to Asia. And like every decision you make, you go all in and just pack your stuff and you are out of the country heading to Asia. And what's the reasoning behind that? Like, why did you want to go there?
I was convinced to go to Asia during the summer break between my last 2 years of university. So I changed from physics to electrical and electronic engineering. And this was the summer of 2005. And I saw not only incredible weather, which us Brits are just not familiar with, and the vibrancy, the colors that you see around when the sun is in full-blown mode, but I saw some of the poorest people on the planet with some of the biggest smiles on their faces. I tasted flavors that I'd never tasted before and saw scenery that I'd only ever seen in a movie before. And I came back to London and realized that we've got the whole system wrong. Some of the richest people on the planet are some of the most miserable people on the planet. And an idea was formed. So about a year after that first experience of being in Thailand, as you said, I jumped in the deep end, full commitment. 3 days after my last exam, I had a one-way ticket booked to Thailand with about $400 in my bank account. And really no plan, but ended up spending about 10 years of my adult life in Asia and did pretty well out there. I still have such a fond attachment to Asia. I just got off of a call with a potential sponsor out of Hong Kong, and I lived in Hong Kong for 4 years as part of that 10. And just, there's something really magical about that out there. And travel is really the best education that this world could give us.
For sure. I totally agree with that. And for you, it's like you go from the clubs to university to wealth management in Hong Kong. And by 2009, you end up back behind the turntables again. How does that happen?
Right. So somewhere along the way, I did some modeling as well. I was scouted as a model when I was 16, 17 years and kept on doing that stuff on and off all the way through my time in London and in Thailand and Hong Kong. And what you'll find is that wherever you find beautiful people, and I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the other models, you'll always find powerful people. And so I was always invited to these incredible parties where these guys had all of the models in attendance, all of the money in the world to do whatever they wanted to do. And they had all of the DJ equipment, but they would never have, only rarely have someone that was there to DJ if they kind of took the guy from the club. And so using my skills and experience of being a DJ before, I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to play at these clubs. It's kind of fun. Like I'll just play at these parties that they're organizing, these boat parties and after parties. And all of a sudden, some of the club owners from the best clubs in Hong Kong were like, you should just do this in our club. So at the end of 2009, while working in finance, I started DJing in the best club in Hong Kong and landed a residency there, which means I was there once, maybe twice a week. And early 2010, I was having so much fun with the DJing, playing across Hong Kong and Macau, which for the listeners who haven't heard of Macau is basically the Vegas of the East, that I decided to do the cardinal sin and I quit my day job and became a full-time DJ and never looked back. I mean, that lasted for the better part of 10 years and took me all over the world.
Do you have like a DJ name and a curated personality and look, or are you just like the giant tall DJ that everybody knows because you stick out?
Well, yeah, I definitely stick out. Remember, 6'6", but I was living in Asia as well.
Right.
My DJ name was just my name, Benjamin Alexander. And if the listeners want to search for something, if you search for that plus the words robot heart, you'll find some of my recordings from Burning Man.
Okay. And do you have a curated personality or look, or what do you look like as a performer? Is it just regular Benji, or is it something where you like come and you become a different person for the time that you're on the turntables?
Yeah, no, I mean, this was around about that moment where deadmau5 was putting on the mouse head and doing all of that stuff. But The type of music I was playing wasn't really like that. It wasn't for the masses. It was a niche within the house music scene. It was more of a nuanced sound. So it was just, Benji in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and that's it. It was all about the music. It wasn't about the marketing that surrounded it or any of the puff. It was really just about music.
How long does it take for you to go from just the Hong Kong clubs to parties to traveling all over the world? I mean, does that kind of ramp up pretty fast? It seems like everything you do has a really quick trajectory.
That's part and parcel because of the amount of time and effort I put into it. But with the DJing, it takes a little while. It takes a moment to be able to prove that you are worth more than the DJ that they have locally, right? If I'm going to have to pay a couple of $1,000 to fly you from another country and put you up in a hotel, tell me why you're better than the guy that I have that lives a mile away. And so it takes some time. And there were definitely moments where I was kind of scrapping together my last coins to buy the sub of the day just to be conservative with my budget. And I definitely had that artist moment where it's like, I'm fully into this thing now. It's like, I have to succeed or I'm going to go broke. And I remember those struggles in Hong Kong, which is an incredibly expensive to try to be a creative person inside of. I really started to travel the world, I would say, in 2012 with my DJing. So, just over 2 years later. And then it hyper accelerated when I decided to move back to Europe in 2013. I felt like I was a little bit too far removed away from the epicenter of my music by being out in Asia. And so moved to Ibiza in May of 2013.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start out with the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. Not only do they make the Northwest's best beers, but if you haven't tried their clean line seltzers or cocktails in a can, well, you're missing out. And you can try just about everything at their Denver, Portland, Boise, and Bend-based pubs. Really, 10 Barrel specializes in everything that I think is fun: skiing, snowboarding, biking, and drinking beer outside. And from supporting a world-class team of athletes that includes Lucas Walks, Ejack, Curtis Cizek, Kate Zeleth, Carson Storch, and Ben Ferguson, they also create countless events and host their own, like their epic Pray for Snow parties. On top of that, they give back to causes like Protect Our Winners. They have supported this podcast for years, and to celebrate that, next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and drink it outside. For more on everything 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Next up is Elan Skis, and I've told you before how much fun I'm having on my Ripstick 96 Black Edition. And for the past decade, I've skied a wider ski because that's what I thought people did in the Northwest. And I've had a blast on my Ripstick 106. But when it's hard and fast out there, the 96 is so much more fun. That carving sensation, well, I feel it a whole lot more, and I'm hooked on the more narrow-waisted ski. And being that these skis are made in Elan's best-in-class factory in Slovenia, the quality of my skis is visibly better than anything else on the wall. Next time you're at a place that you can demo some skis, try something out of the Ripstick line and you will be sold on Elan just like I am. They are so good and they're always good times. To find out more about the skis, message me or check out elanskis.com. My final sponsor is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. They have been getting people on the mountain for longer than almost anyone, and they know retail and the internet. And they always have something cool going on their Instagram page. This week, they're teaming up with 686 to give away a HydraStash Smarty Vest, which is an amazing combination of the weatherproof and waterproofness that 686 is known for, along with a stealthily positioned 25-ounce water bladder. And entry is easy. First, follow Peter Glenn Sports and 686 on Instagram. Second, like Peter Glenn's 686 giveaway post. Third, tag 2 friends in the comments who need this product. It's that easy, and the winner will be announced February 11th. Good luck, and head on over to peterglenn.com for all of your product needs. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. And does anybody think you're crazy for giving up your day job and mortgaging your future on this whole DJ thing where you have 2 years of not doing big stuff and then it all explodes when you start traveling a ton by 2013? But do your parents or friends think you're crazy for having this wild idea and actually going 110% in on it?
Well, I mean, everyone thinks I'm crazy whenever I take these risks. But I think the interesting thing is the way that I assess the downside risk. So when I left England with, literally no money in my bank account to go to Thailand, I mean, $400 is not going to last you long. The downside risk that I thought was just, okay, it'll be a shame if I have to come back home to England, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. And the same with finance. I left the finance gig knowing that if I wanted to go back to the desk job, it's not as if my brain is going to disappear and I'm not able to perform that function again. I can just always go back to that desk job. And so there are these big leaps of faith that I take that other people think are absolutely insane, but I think people like comfort a little too much. And I really like to throw myself into these kind of do or die moments. There's this really fascinating book that gets referenced a lot called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Mm-hmm. Back in the 80s and 90s, the finance guys absolutely loved it. And one of the key phrases that I remember from that book, and I read this book now over 20 years ago, was if you were like a general looking to invade an island, the first thing you do when you land on that beach is you have the soldiers burn the boat. And the reason they burn the boat is because you're taking away their way out. Now they know the only way out is success. They have to win the battle to survive. And I like to do that. So when I retired from DJing in 2018, I made a very, very public statement to say that I'm hanging up my headphones and you won't see me again as a professional DJ and I'm on to the next thing, even though I hadn't fully figured out what that was. And likewise, many people just said, you're absolutely crazy. You get paid thousands of dollars just to play an hour and a half of music. Why would you not just keep doing that on the side while you're figuring out what the next thing is? And for me, I have to burn the boat to feel really committed to the next thing. Otherwise, you just never let go of the comfort that's behind you.
Well, it seems like taking that attitude has really worked with everything that you've done. And by the time DJing starts exploding for you, I think one of the biggest events that you do year after year, you've already referenced, was Burning Man. What are some of the other big events that you find yourself at?
So I get to go to nightclubs all around the world. And for me, I really, really enjoyed that more so than the big things. The big things can be somewhat removed from the crowd. I mean, we've all seen these photos and videos of DJs up on a stage, 15, 20 feet away from the audience, and the audience are kind of held back behind a metal fence. That's not that fun. I really enjoy to be in clubs with 200, 300 people where, people's drinks are right on the console right beside you and you're interacting with people. And so I try to kind of keep my bookings to the kind of more fun and intimate things as opposed to I'm this guy up on a stage 20 feet away from everyone standing by myself. I don't enjoy those at all.
Is there a big difference in pay when you're on the stage in front of 50,000 people compared to being at a small, intimate club? I mean, can you make a lot more money doing the non-personal type show?
Yes, but there's also quite a lot of the clubs that I would perform in also have like pretty decent paychecks because they're kind of catering to VIP tables. So people are dropping a lot of money to buy bottles on tables, and so the fee can be quite good in small clubs as well.
Gotcha. Eventually, you end up with a gig that takes you all the way to Mica Creek to play music for a bunch of people that you know through music. Does it take convincing to get you there because you're not a skier?
Yeah, so my buddy Tom, who was the guy who organized the trip, invited me, and first I said no. Why would I go to a ski trip if I had no ability to ski? And so I said to Tom, you know what I'll do? I have a gig coming up in Lebanon and I have to fly through Dubai. I'm going to go and learn how to ski powder in the indoor mall that they have, and then I'll come and I'll ski. And like just how like you laughed, he laughed as well. I had no concept of what that meant. And fortunately, when I got to Dubai, the ski hill was closed. It was their 10-year anniversary, so they had some events going on. It wasn't open to the public. It was more of like a show. And so Tom convinced me. He's like, look, the accommodation at Mica is like the Four Seasons. Just come and hang out, and it'll be incredible. Well, there's going to be 25 of us or whatever the number is, and it's just going to be like the best Christmas you've ever had. And honestly, that Christmas of 2015 was the best Christmas, one of the best Christmases I've ever had.
I mean, these dudes must be absolute ballers if they're renting out all of Mica Creek during Christmas week. Are you always traveling with super wealthy people like that? Like you said, at the clubs, there's a lot of wealth and a lot of bottle service, but like, do you find yourselves always traveling with like those high rollers?
I won't say always, but I do have a lot of people in my network that are self-made, I think is the first thing to say that's really important, but are self-made and are incredibly successful. And I think the type of character that goes to Burning Man that is, keen to figure out what that kind of counterculture event is about and to kind of deal with all of the complexities and the logistics of getting out there and having fun, it attracts a certain type of person. So yeah, there are a lot of people like that person in my orbit.
And you fit into this whole crew as well. I mean, through traveling the world through DJing, you've done pretty well for yourself too. Do you have all the things like a house, car, toys, all that good stuff?
No, I was never a materialistic person. I was all about the experience. So all of my money comes in one hand and goes straight out the other hand on fun things that I want to do and tick off in my life. I mean, I was just speaking with my parents yesterday who were the recipients of quite a solid windfall from my grandparents. And I always say to them, like, you're not going to take it with you to the grave. You're almost pushing 70 now. Like, have fun with it. Get out there. I don't want it in the will. Give it to my brother, but you should be getting out there and enjoying life. I'm not a materialistic person at all as it pertains to those things.
So you're more of a blow it if you got it type guy and everybody's going to have a good time?
Totally. Exactly.
How about the lifestyle? I would think that when you're playing a ton of different clubs, there's definitely drugs there from ecstasy to Molly to whatever the club kids are on. Do you participate in that on special occasions all the time? Never? How does that work as a DJ?
Look, I think it's really important to be on a similar level to your crowd when you're performing. I never performed sober. Never. I used to joke that it was such a fantastic job that I could get paid to be drunk and perform. And part of the reason for that is I have an incredibly analytical mind, and that's been kind of beaten into me through my education. And when I'm sober, it's just so hard to try to understand what's going on in the crowd. You're kind of overanalyzing the small things as opposed to enjoying the music yourself and just choosing things through feeling, which works a lot better. So yeah, I would never ever perform sober. And there were many times where I'd arrive at a gig late and they'd want me to go onto the stage immediately. And they'd be like, well, first of all, let's bring over a couple of shots and a couple of beers and then I'll go and play. So yeah, you kind of need to be on a similar level as your crowd, but you need to be professional, right? You can't mess around. And so for me, just beers and a few shots are really what get me into the right place.
Okay. And you've DJ'd at sex parties, which sounds interesting to me, or swingers parties, or I don't know, probably all different types of parties. And when you're behind the turntables and you're looking out and you're at a party like that, are you watching people have sex as you're playing music? Are people trying to give you blowjobs in the booth? What are parties like that for you? Are you just the talent, or are they interacting with you as well?
Oh, geez. I would say no comment, but that's boring.
Totally boring.
Yeah, exactly. Better than saying no comment. I would say there are definitely lots of things on offer, and there are many, many things in one's eye line when performing at events like that. And that's not the norm. I've probably done a couple of those. I'll do you one better for all of the people that have the chance to interact with me, and I'm going to be out on a bunch of different ski hills over the next year. I would happily tell you some of the fun stories of the things that happen at events like that in person.
All right. So anybody that sees Benji, you can ask him about playing at sex parties and what he saw in his eyesight, what happened behind the booth, and all of those great things. But we're going to throw it back to Micah. So you get in the heli, you meet the rest of the crew, and you realize the mountains are an amazing place and you're going to learn how to ski. And one day you're going to come back to Micah and you're going to do that shit for real there. Is that your program?
Absolutely. So they took us up to the top of the mountain to meet the skiers for lunch. And when I saw these guys put on their 130 millimeter Black Crow powder skis and just disappear at the end of lunch, I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. These were my normal friends that just turned into superheroes right in front of my eyes. And I vowed that I would not come back to Micah unless I was part of the skiing contingent. So had my first lessons out in Whistler in February of 2016. And by the end of 2017, my 9th day of skiing ever was heli skiing at Micah.
Oh, sick. So you were able to get back there very quickly, because I know you do Whistler and that's a lesson. And then after the lesson, you're skiing and you kind of start figuring it out more. But then the next big thing that you do is you go to Mammoth with a buddy and they get a shit ton of snow. Do you get hooked on skiing at Mammoth, or is that where you get totally worked, or is it both?
Both. Yeah. So my buddy George, who runs the Sierra Nevada Lodge there, he took me, or tricked me, shall we say, into going down a black run halfway through my 3rd day of skiing. And as you would imagine, it was a complete yard sale. But most importantly, I realized that I didn't die.
Right.
So we put all the equipment back on again, jumped on the chairlift and tried to do the exact same run again. And I struggled, but I got down it. And he looked at me and he saw something in my eyes. He said, I think you got this, bud. I got to get back to work. And he left me alone. And I spent the next 3 days trying to go down all of the black runs at Mammoth. And I have these awesome series of videos of like all of the falls that I had, but I was hooked. Once a beginner skier learns that you can go down a black run and even if you fall, you're not going to die, it opens up so much of the mountain, and then skiing becomes fun. If you're out there and you're kind of trying to avoid the blues because you're not good enough, or trying to avoid the blacks, skiing is quite a scary sport for a beginner, especially as an adult beginner. So that moment where George tricked me to go down this black run was really, it opened up the whole world of skiing for me, and I became absolutely hooked at that moment.
Yeah, when you realize you're not going to die, especially when they have a ton of snow, and you realize, yeah, I'm just going to fall and it might take me a while to get my shit back together. That's when you realize that you can keep doing it again and again, and it's fun. It doesn't even hurt when you fall when it's that deep, because it sounds like it was a pretty deep day. And then you eventually go to Micah again, like you say, on your 9th day of skiing, and you do heli skiing there. But I'm going to fast forward a couple years. You end up at the Beijing Olympics as a spectator, and you notice that Jamaica only has 3 athletes there. Is that where you get the crazy idea that maybe you just might be able to make it to the Olympics one day? Or was it just like you were there and it was a coincidence that you noticed that about Jamaica?
Well, actually, you say fast forward a couple of years, you only fast forwarded a few weeks. So Micah 2017 to Pyeongchang, February 2018, all of this happened in such a compressed format. So 2018 was a really important moment for this whole ski journey. First of all, I went to an event called Send It, which is a group of tech entrepreneurs, successful people that come together to meet at Revelstoke, which is such an incredible mountain to ski. And so for me, this was the first time really that I had enough chops to kind of keep up with some of the groups. This was the first time I really experienced skiing in a big social group. As I said, 200 people, and we all wear armbands, so you can see who's part of your crew from a mile off. And I just started to love the whole social element of skiing, the whole element of it's team human versus the mountain. Everyone's out there to have a good time and to help each other get home safely. Now, being mixed race, I was, of course, the black representative of the entire group.
Right.
And being of Jamaican origin, everyone would start throwing around the cool runnings jokes and you should go to the Olympics and Jamaican on ice, which absolutely was not in my agenda at that time. So that very same month, February of 2018, I went to Pyeongchang, went to my first ever Olympics, really fell in love with the spirit and what was going on out there, and did notice that there were only 3 athletes in representation for a country that is a complete powerhouse in the Summer Games. So I think subconsciously the kernel of an idea was formed there. Next month, I skied in Niseko, and a couple of months later, I was in Patagonia, driving thousands of miles by myself to find better snow in Chile and Argentina. And 2018 was also the year where I retired from DJing. And so the culmination of those 3 things, learning about the social side of the sport, going to the Olympics, and then retiring from DJing were kind of like the perfect storm that put this idea in my head. Let's see if I could go to the Olympics with Jamaica, if that's even a possibility.
Well, it sounds like you're a dude that always needs a ridiculous, crazy challenge, and you're always going to be up for it. So you burnt the boat, like you said, and you're not going to be a DJ anymore. And while it would make the whole story more amazing that you watch Cool Runnings, the movie, and then it all happens in your head like I've seen the movie and everything kind of clicks, is that the case, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, I would love, just like you said, if, I watched that movie as a boy and said, I'm going to follow in their footsteps and do something. If it was that simple, it would have happened 20 years ago, right? That movie came out over almost 30 years ago now. But had it not been for the movie, then people wouldn't have been throwing the suggestions of going to the Olympics, or they wouldn't have been throwing out the outlandish feat of the 1988 bobsled team, throwing it into my face every time I was out there skiing. And so really without the movie, this idea doesn't happen. So it's not a direct line, but definitely without the movie, this idea doesn't happen.
Okay. And by like the 2019, 2020 season, do you figure out the path? Like, do you kind of do the research and realize that you can become part of the Jamaican team because your dad was born there? And if you get some FIS points at every race, there's a chance that you can actually make the Olympics and it's not as crazy as one would think?
Yeah, so this is exactly what happened. I decided to check myself into a 10-day silent meditation retreat for New Year's of 2018 going into 2018. So I was like 3 hours away from Tokyo in this basically like mental prison where you're not allowed to look anyone in the eye, not allowed to talk to anyone, no hand gestures, no books, no technology. Absolutely insane. But coming out of that, I had decided to go to a month in Revelstoke. And I said to myself, look, let's just have a month of continuous skiing and see what happens. For me, I thought the most likely outcome was going to be death or serious injury because I was such a kamikaze skier. We've all seen them. And on the 4th day, I believe it was, of my month in Revelstoke, I got the opportunity to ski with a guy called Gordon Gray, former Europa Cup level skier for the United States. And I went straight up to him. I knew who he was and said, hey, I have this idea. Tell me what you think. So we just met that moment. And he said, okay, let's ski together. I'll tell you what I think. At lunchtime, he pulls me aside and says, all right, Benji, your technique is absolutely atrocious. I have never seen anything worse. But you told me you've only skied 25 days by now and you've only had 2 lessons. To be expected. This stuff doesn't just come by osmosis. It's an incredibly technical sport. He pauses and says, but I have no idea how the hell you are keeping up with me. I have skied my entire life. I skied at the highest levels and I just can't figure it out. You're absolutely fearless. You're insane. He says, I think you can do this. We can teach you technique, but if you're afraid, you're never going to get to where you need to go. You are fearless. I think with enough hard work and determination, you can actually make this happen. And it was Gordon that really kind of set me on my trajectory of, okay, we should try to do giant slalom. And then there were a couple of other coaches, such as Mike Schneider out of Canada, who really helped me set a framework of this is where you should live. This is the equipment you should be focused on. This is what you should be training on. And these are the things you should try to have as your milestones through this 2-year period. And yeah, as you said, it's not a case of collecting FIS points. It's not a cumulative thing. You have to actually perform. So you have to finish within a threshold of the winner 5 times to qualify.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with the Seattle brand that has been around since 1913. I'm talking about Stanley. and they invented the category of keeping things hot and cold. Sure, there are a ton of overpriced copycats out there, but no one delivers the quality and, most importantly, the ability to keep things hotter or colder for longer than Stanley. I use the water bottles and pint glasses on a daily basis, and on weekends, their food storage solutions are perfect for all the foods you bring to eat at your local ski area. And while I know this won't last forever, the best deal you're going to find on any Stanley products anywhere comes through my podcast. I'm going to save you 30% off everything Stanley. All you need to do is go to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, enter the one-word code DRINKFAST to get that deal. If you spend $75, I'll throw in a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. And last but definitely not least is Alpine Vans. Alpine Vans is your one-stop shop for your dream adventure mobile. If you haven't checked out the Cody Townsend van video on their homepage, watch it, and you're going to see why Alpine Vans are leaps and bounds ahead of the competition, which is why they only have 2 vans left to build out this season. And they have big plans for next year. So if you want to get one of those 2 vans that they have left, well, head over to alpinevans.com and fill out their thoughtful quote builder and questionnaire. While I can't guarantee you'll get one of the last 2 practical, durable, easy-to-use vans that they have in stock, it's worth a try. And if you don't get one, I recommend holding out for next fall. And that's all I can really say because Alpine Vans has big plans, but they won't let me tell you about them until the fall. So check out Alpine Vans, see what they're able to do, and hold tight until you can get your hands on one of those vehicles. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. The big thing for you at Revy is you're there for, 6 weeks or so. I think you ski 40 days, but you ski like 1.7 million vertical feet, which you've kind of equated to about 10 years of skiing. But the way you do things, that's pretty much par for the course for you. You're going all in and you're going to make this shit happen. And then you leave Revy and you decide to make Jackson Hole home. Are you able to work with the Jackson Hole race team and get some pointers from them and get on the course with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something I want to pull up, and I'm really happy you did. So yeah, it was supposed to be a month in Revelstoke. I extended 6 weeks. I skied 37 days and did ski 1.7 million vertical feet. Now, just to kind of break that down, while I'm training over the last 6 months, on average, we'll only ski about 10,000 vertical feet a day. So that's 170 days worth that I did in those 37 days in Revelstoke. And the reason I kind of equate that to 10 years of leisure skiing is because, we've all been out there. I'm obsessed with tracking my metrics, and that's part of what has kind of given me the drive and the forward motion. And so if you calculate when you're out with a group of kind of unorganized friends or with the family, maybe you're doing 10 or 15,000 vertical feet a day. Maybe you're getting 5 to 10 days on snow each year if you don't live in the mountains. And when you do the math, that 1.7 million vertical feet is going to take the average non-mountain dwelling person the better part of a decade to get to. So I really played catch up. So yeah, as you say, end of 2019, moved out to Jackson and was training with, the club who train out of Snow King. And both of those mountains, JHMR and Snow King, have been incredibly supportive of my journey.
And when you leave Revelstoke, before you even get there, do you leave there a good skier or are you still kind of a kook? Where are you in the grand scheme of skiing?
I'm 100% a kook, still 100% a kook. Because the thing is, during those 1.7 million vertical feet, I didn't have any training. So I'm still skiing in the back seat. I'm still on my heels. I'm still just kind of like survival skiing, but I'm doing it really fast. And I had no concept of the fact that race training and racing is basically a different sport to skiing. I learned that the hard way about 18 months ago. The two things are completely different. And one of the missteps that I made in this whole project is that I absolutely should have gotten onto race skis earlier and gotten some race training much earlier.
Because, you don't get any until you're at Jackson, it seems like. And is it limited there? Are you able to get with the Snow King and the Jackson Hole people like almost daily? Or how often are you actually to get race training?
So my first day of race training was after my first race. I just threw myself into my first races just to see what it felt like. And my first day of race training was 2 days before the world shut down, which was really frustrating. So for me, race training didn't properly start until December of 2021. So I massively made a mistake there in not getting on that much earlier. And unfortunately, their opinion of me has now changed. But unfortunately, when I first walked into the Jackson Hole Ski and Snowboard Club, they kind of laughed at the idea. They're like, there's no way this is going to happen. And so instead of allowing me to join in with the 16 and 18-year-old FIS kids who are at the level that I needed to get to, they put me with the master's program. So I was getting 3 days of training, an hour and a half at each, which is nowhere near enough for my goal. And I was very frustrated with that, but I didn't have other options in Jackson. JHMR were amazing. They allowed me unlimited access into their NASTAR course. So whenever that was up and running, I would just be running laps inside of their course. But again, ski racing is so complicated. Without someone looking at you and videoing you and giving you feedback, you just go nowhere.
Yeah, and do you eventually get that? I mean, with all the different people that you're meeting at all these races, do you have any skiers that you're able to like hook up with and they become almost mentors to you that are on the race circuit as well?
Yeah, I get the opportunity to train with Lisa Ballard, based out of Montana, and she is an incredible coach. And when I train with her, I realized that if you have a lot of attention and a lot of focus, you can actually make huge improvements. And she really tuned me up, shall we say, before I went out to Lutz in Minnesota and scored my personal best for that season. But realistically, it wasn't until I got to Austria in May of last year, 2021, that I had a coach that said, okay, Benji, people look at you and they assume that you've gotten this far because, you've kind of gone through the ranks. I'm going to look at you and say, what do you actually know? Let's work with the basic stuff. Let's work with where is your balance on the ski? How are you actually trying to turn this? And so within a couple of days, he's like, okay, I see that you have absolutely none of the foundational stuff, none of the fundamentals, and we need to work on that. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. And so in truth, when I talk about race coaching, race training proper, that didn't start for me until the second half of May 2021.
And that's in Hintertux? Is that when you're on the glacier there?
Yeah, not too far. It's another mountain about 3 hours drive away from there called Kitzsteinhorn, which is in the town of Kaprun.
Okay. Are you on the Jamaican team yet, or has Jamaica kind of endorsed you and have you done all the paperwork that needs to happen to be part of Team Jamaica at that point?
Yeah, so that's something I got sorted out ahead of time. So I had my Jamaican citizenship and my passport arrived in 2019. I had my FIS license also pretty quickly after that by the end of 2019 so that I could jump into my first races in January of 2020, even though I was on the complete wrong ski at my own personal disadvantage and the complete wrong boot. I mean, I was in basically a touring boot, which for anyone that knows anything about racing just understands how insane that is. But yeah, I had all of the paperwork set up. And at that moment, I was the only person that was attempting this and still am currently the only person in the FIS database that is attempting this. So you could say that as of my first race of January 2022, I have been the sole member of the Jamaican ski team.
And is it mandatory that you spend time in Jamaica if you're going to be an Olympian for that country?
No, not at all. I spent 4 months there in 2020, but just having a passport is enough.
Okay. And were you blown away when you went there by how much weed and Bob Marley is such a big part of their culture? Because it's the stereotype, but then you get there and you get off the plane and they're like, yeah, man, selling you a Bob Marley lighter and offering you weed like the second you get off the plane.
Bob Marley is God in Jamaica.
He really is.
Quite often there are these stereotypes about a place that you get to the place and you realize are not true. As it pertains to Jamaica with weed and Bob Marley, it's absolutely true. And I just thought that was incredible. I spent a lot of time exploring the island. I'm the type of person that travels to a new place and doesn't make a plan, just gets in the car and drives and figures things out. So I drove the entire coastline and just kind of laid my hat down wherever I thought seemed cool. The one thing that I didn't get to experience in Jamaica that I'm kind of really regretful of is the music scene, the nightlife, the inspiration for a lot of the things that got me into DJing 20 years ago. And that's because of the pandemic. So I'm super excited to get back out there. But yeah, as you say, weed and Bob Marley are absolutely everywhere. And it's kind of cool. I'm not a weed smoker, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was so interesting, like to the point where when I was there, my dad was like, hey, how do I tell these people that I don't want weed? Because the hotel maid is offering me weed. And then the jet ski rental guys pulling up on the beach, offering weed from the jet ski motor compartment. It was crazy. And I was like, Dad, just you got to look at them and be like, I'm good. And they're not going to try to sell you weed. And he finally figured that out. But over there, did they totally embrace you? Like, will you be a national hero there for life once the games are over?
Absolutely. The Prime Minister has already made several posts about the success of bringing Jamaica into a new discipline. And second to the whole kind of weed and reggae Bob Marley culture, Jamaica's biggest export is the Olympics, right? The association with the Olympics, Usain Bolt, or the clean sweep of the women's 100-meter medals this past year. Jamaica is such a powerhouse in the Olympics, and they're so proud of their heritage and also of their kind of winter heritage as well with the Cool Runnings guys. And so opening up Jamaica into a new discipline was such a huge thing for the country. And even when I was there as an aspirational qualifier, this was August of 2020, I still was featured on all of the breakfast TV shows, all of the newspapers, and people were recognizing me on the street. And I even was able to use it to negotiate a better deal for my rent when I was there.
You bring up the Cool Runnings guys, and they have taken you under their wing, or one of the guys there has taken you under their wing as kind of like your mentor from Jamaica.
Right. So Dudley Stokes, who was the pilot of the 88 team and went to 4 Winter Olympics himself and still maintains quite an important role with regards to Jamaica bobsledding, has been my mentor for the last 18 months. And we speak all the time. We were on the phone for an hour yesterday. We typically are interacting pretty much on a every other day basis over WhatsApp. But when we get on the call, it normally is for several hours. The only reason yesterday was cut short is because I arrived at my uncle's house and had to kind of jump off the phone. But he's great. Having him on my team not only validates what I'm trying to do, it also gives it this kind of passing of the torch, passing of the baton type feel. But it's great to have someone that wrote the book on doing outlandish things for a Caribbean nation at the Winter Games to kind of lean on him whenever I'm having difficulties, or to ask him questions that no other people are really in such a position to help with an answer.
And the beauty of this is, in like 5 years, you're going to have your own movie, and it's going to be like Cool Runnings 2, but it's going to be Cool Skiings, and everybody's going to be talking about your ski career and how that changed Jamaica in the Winter Olympics. But before you can even get to the Olympics, you have to get all of these points. And FIS points aren't easy to come by, especially for a dude who's only been skiing for 6 years, because most of the people that are on that level, they've been skiing since they were 2 years old. Their family has been feeding money into this machine year after year after year to get them faster and faster and faster. And eventually they get to the level where they can get these FIS points, they can make the Olympics. But this year it was a little bit different because the rules were adjusted in the name of equality. And it was more for men and women. I feel like the number was equal for men and women in each 156 spots for the men in the U.S. and the same for the women, or something like that. Does it make it any easier for you with the rules being adjusted?
No, absolutely not. And I would say it makes it harder, and I'll explain why. But first of all, let me just explain to the listeners what the qualification status is. So the minimum threshold of qualification for the Olympics is 160 FIS points. And they choose this number rather arbitrarily, but it's just set there to make sure that whoever competes in the Olympics is safe and competent. The 160 FIS point level is by no stretch of anyone's imagination competitive. By definition, what it means is you will be 16 to 20 seconds back from the winner on a good day.
And that's an eternity in ski racing.
Yeah, that's an eternity when you consider the top 10 guys are going to be finishing within a second of each other, right? There's going to be 1 second separating the top 10. But the IOC wants to have as many nations represented at the games as possible. And so this year, I believe the number is 85 countries in alpine skiing, where I think the former best was only like 72. Now, the changing of the quota system has caused quite a lot of issues. So first of all, what no one talks about is the primary reason it's changed is because of the equality. For the first time, teams can only send a maximum of 11 men and 11 guys. Previously, the maximum was 22 athletes and only 14 of one gender, which, read between the lines, was always going to be 14 guys. And so a lot of countries went really heavy on their male athletes. And that's because there are 50% more males in the ski racing database than there are females. So what this has caused is, with the reduced overall number, so 188 down to 153 total, plus the equality, a lot of these countries have been really squeezed on their male quota of athletes. And then you add into the fact that there are 10 or 12 more nations than expected. Now, all of a sudden, a lot of the big established nations have become really upset with their limited quotas. They're used to sending, a full roster of 22 athletes. And sadly, it's become the smaller nations that are the target for what's wrong with the Olympics. And it kind of smells a little bit of elitism for me. And it's really sad that the human interest of the Olympics has become the subject of why are these guys here? But I mean, these are just the rules. And look, whenever things change, there's always a bit of kind of switching costs and pain that is associated with it. And I think that there'll be slight amendments to the rules going into 2026. But again, people will always find something to complain about.
Well, I think if you look at the last Olympics, there was a half-pipe skier named Elizabeth Swanee. And she went to every single event she possibly could go to. And she was able to accumulate enough points to be able to compete in half-pipe, which would be commendable had she been able to get out of the half pipe, had she been better than me. But unfortunately, she wasn't. And I suck, but she really wasn't. And unfortunately, it became almost a joke. And while I'm sure it became really terrible for her and she heard a lot of stuff, it probably bumped some people out of the Olympics. And with you, I know that you were really tight with Steve Nyman. I think he helped you, and Charlotte Moats, his wife, helped you and kind of brought you up, or at least they were mentors as terms of athletes. Steve's not going to the Olympics. And does you going, or the dude from Ghana, or the dude from Kazakhstan, does that push him out? Does that have any effect on it? Is it kind of like an ironic thing that you guys are tight and unfortunately you might not be as competitive as he is, but you're going to the Olympics and he's not?
Yeah, no, look, there's a lot of things in that question, so let's take some time to unload it. No, that's fine, but it is a really important topic, and I'm very, very happy to talk about it, but it's important to be diligent to not miss things, right? So let's start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth was one of these people that gets classified as like an Olympic tourist. They're going to the Olympics purely because they want to have the Olympic experience, and her being there doesn't do anything positive for the sport. In fact, it kind of maybe puts it through a bad lens for a lot of people. Elizabeth is Stanford educated white female from the United States with means, and found a way to game the system. And so earlier on in this podcast where you said about collecting fist points, that's why I was very clear to change that to say that we have to perform, and have to perform 5 times. It's about performance. I could go to all of the races in the world and that wouldn't help. There's no accumulation of points. With Elizabeth's situation for half pipe, it was a points accumulator, and she just threw money at it and found a way to accumulate points to get them to the threshold she needed. And yes, it was a bit of a joke that she didn't even kind of pull any tricks in the half pipe and someone better than her wasn't able to go. So that's the Elizabeth Swanee thing. As it pertains to Steve and Charlotte, they are absolutely epic. I've had the chance to get out there and ski with them both a couple of times. And Charlotte and Steve have been people that I would lean on for advice and support and some kind of direction as it pertains to understanding this whole system. And it breaks my heart that Steve is one of the people that is not going to the Olympics right now, because I'll be very blunt, over the last 2 years, that's one of the things I've been looking forward to the most, being out there with Steve. And so if you look at what happened, there are lots of countries that going into this were receiving a much lower quota than ever before. And so, as I said, the US team, who had the opportunity to have maximum of 11 skiers, only came into this expecting 6 skiers. And that was way before I qualified or anything else. So this is the problem with the current system, is that it pits the smaller nations, such as myself and the other countries that you mentioned, against athletes from the established nations that aren't the best of the best of the best, but they are, in the top 10 of their country. So it creates this really weird friction that's very palpable to me. I really feel it, where you are having incredible athletes that are far beyond the abilities of myself and anyone else that you mentioned, those other nations that you mentioned, not being able to go to the games because the IOC have set a minimum threshold of 160 fist points that, as we said, is not competitive. And that allows each country to get to the games. And so I think collectively, we need to have an understanding of what are the Olympics. Should every country just have one participant? Well, that kind of sucks, because there's going to be lots of countries where maybe the second best guy in the world also is in the same country as the guy who's number 1 in the world. And it would suck for the second best in the world to not be there, right? So we need something that's a little bit more nuanced than just one per country. But we're in this situation now where there are lots of the big established countries really upset that they can't send their 10th best person at the cost of a new country being in the game. So we need to have a collective understanding of what the game should be about. Firstly, if you dig into it and you want the Olympics to just be about the best of the best of the best, in certain disciplines, such as Super G, for example, Super G is the worst. If it was only about the top 100 athletes, there would only be 10 countries in representation.
Sure.
Now, that's not the Olympics. The Olympics is about the best of the best of the best, but it's also about the friendly competition outside of war of nations, and bringing more countries to the fold is what that's all about. Now, let's take a second to think about the differences between, shall we say, Elizabeth's participation in the 2018 games and Benji's participation at the 2022 games. I can guarantee you, by virtue of the fact that, my story and my journey to the games was featured in Rolling Stones 2 days ago. It was in The Economist the day before. It's been in every magazine, left, right, backwards and forwards. And I can guarantee that Jamaica's participation in giant slalom has put those two words into the vocabulary of an extra 100,000 and maybe 1 million or so more people by the time the games is over than would have ever considered turning on the TV had that not been the case, where all of these new nations are represented. And I think sometimes at the cost of some of the elite athletes not getting the chance to go there, it still benefits the sport. A rising tide rises all ships, and having more countries turn on and tune in to watch this thing called giant slalom, the only discipline that I'm qualified for, will bring more eyeballs. More eyeballs brings more sponsor dollars. More sponsor dollars means more money for the athletes, and the sport becomes more interesting to more people. If we keep going down this path of becoming incredibly elitist and only 5 countries in the world really have a chance at medaling, eventually the sport dies. You know, bobsledding is on that trajectory. 80% of the people that watch bobsledding are German, male, and over the age of 60. That's a really horrible statistic to think about the future of that sport. That's not going to go anywhere.
It's like magazine readers.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like ski racing is also on that trajectory where there are parts of the world that live and die by skiing. And I've lived in them for the last 6 months and been blown away how people actually gather around the TV to watch a World Cup. But the rest of the world don't feel that way. So having really interesting human interest stories of people going to the Olympics in these sports actually benefits the sport. And that is the reason why the International Olympic Committee set the threshold the way they do, and why the International Ski Federation are the biggest supporters of small nations. There's always going to be some people that just fall on the wrong side of the line, right? And that's the sad part of the fact that it happens to be Steve. And I think even if America had 1 or 2 more slots, I'm not sure if Steve would have got the first one because of his World Cup points. So yeah, it's the sad part of the fact, but I think we can all zoom out and say it sucks that there are incredible athletes that are not going this time, but every country has their best representatives that they could get with inside of their quota. That is by definition. But I definitely feel like having these extra handful of nations at the games is improving the visibility of the sport. That in turn improves what the sport will be in the years to come.
It sounds like it's the spirit of the Olympics, and it should be this way. And you are about to embark on the biggest journey of your life, and that's so exciting. But what else is exciting is we're at the point in the show for something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And I get someone that you know to ask you 3 questions, and they can be anything. This week, I was able to get a guy who had a terrible 26-foot fall through a roof that caused a massive TBI, and you can read all about his story in his book, The Road to the Top of the Mountain. I'm talking about Matt Masson, and he's also a guy that's interviewed you a bunch, and he talks to you on the phone a lot over the years. And I don't think you've met him, but he's a writer whose work's often found in Down Days and New Schoolers. And are you ready for Matt's question number 1?
Yes, everyone get out there and buy Matt's book. It's an incredible story of having a life-changing accident, struggling to relearn how to walk, and feeling more confident about relearning how to ski before fully relearning how to walk. And he was the journalist who wrote the first big piece on me that ended up in Powder magazine 2 years ago. So yeah, I'm ready for it. Let's go.
All right, here we go.
First of all, well done, Benji. You've come amazing and you've qualified the Olympics, and it's like, I can't believe it. But anyway, and our mutual friend gave me these questions. So here we go. Question number 1. What is the worst DJ gig you ever did?
There were so many of them. And typically they come where the person who's organizing the gig doesn't really understand that you play a specific type of music and that is it. They assume you might be just more like a jukebox where you can play Rihanna and Britney Spears. I remember going to Slovakia, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And I showed up at this club in a city called Nitra. And before me, they were playing hip hop and just basically pop music. And I said to the promoter, dude, this is not going to work. Just, I play house and techno. There's very few lyrics in my words, let alone like anything this audience can jive with. He said, no, it's great. I love your music. This is going to work. I said, dude, I'll give you the money back. It's going to be easier for you, me, and the club, and the bar will sell more alcohol if I just don't play. He said, no. He insisted. So I played, and within like 3 songs, even though I was trying my hardest to find music that had something that the crowd might be able to latch on to, some vocals, just completely cleared the dance floor and spent the next like hour and a half there playing to an empty room. And the promoter was so pissed, not at me, but at the crowd for not understanding this music. Yeah, that was a pretty crappy gig.
All right. Well, we will jump into question number 2.
Number 2 is, what is the stupidest thing you've ever done while wearing a pair of ski boots?
I'm not much of an après guy, so I don't have those kind of answers to this question. I've been so focused on training. The stupidest thing, I guess everyone else thought I was stupid. August of 2020, Lindsay Dyer, myself, and Breezy Johnson decided to go and ski the cave couloir off the Middle Teton in the Grand Teton National Park. And in August, as you can imagine, that's a lot of kind of weed whacking and a big slog up to the mountain. I think it was a 12-mile round trip hike.
Dang.
Just to climb and ski maybe 1,000 vertical feet. I did the whole thing in my ski boots. I did the 12-mile hike backwards and forwards in my ski boots, and everyone just thought I was a complete lunatic. Turns out the other guys in their hiking shoes had more blisters than I did, so I didn't think it was that crazy, but everyone else thought I was crazy.
Yeah, it does sound crazy, but hey, if you don't get blisters, well, good for you. Yeah. We're going to jump into his final inappropriate question.
The third one is, have you ever had sex in public? And I'm guessing there's a story there.
So he got these questions from a friend of yours, so he's guessing there's a story. We hope there is one. I know you weren't going to tell us stories, or you're going to tell us stories in person when we see you, but feel free to share whatever you'd like right here, please.
All right. I'll just kind of tee it up so that when the people do find me in public, they can ask the questions. Let's just say there was a moment where there was a performance while I was performing as a DJ at one of the aforementioned parties, and I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty awesome, cleaning up the turntables a little bit. And that's Inappropriate Questions, and it's the podcast. And when I think about you and I think about your life, it's like you're one of these dudes who's always had some pretty crazy ideas for life and career changes. Like, I'm going to go to Asia. I'm going to go be a DJ and travel the world. I'm going to be a ski racer and make the Olympics. And while all these things may sound totally unrealistic, when you have the determination and the work ethic and the never not believe attitude, anything's possible. And regardless of how you finish, all you have to do is make it through that start gate and you've achieved your goal. And I want to thank you for your time and wish you the best of luck at the Olympics, man.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
So that was time with Benjamin Alexander, and what a story. I mean, we all know people with unrealistic goals, but most of the time, those people don't come close. For Benji, to think he could qualify for the Olympics when he was still in pizza and french fried mode is crazy. And that he actually did it is a testament to the dude's attitude towards everything. Go one speed and don't slow down until you hit the finish line. And when this is all said and done, Benji isn't going to finish well, but he will be an internationally recognized athlete and a Jamaican icon for life, which means it's time to start smoking weed and listening to Bob Marley. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to it. Also, if you have friends that you know who would be interested in the show, please tell them about me. And finally, please support my amazing sponsors. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.